Sanakya Chaksurun Minitam Yanadajmai Sri Giravenama Sri Chaitanyamanovistam Stapitam Yanabhutare Swayam Rupakaramayam Darati So Parantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sriyata Parakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Sri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sadevam Sadvaitam Savidutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Shiveshakanvitam Jam. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinu Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kantara Kantanamostute Jayatam Sarato Pangom Hamamader Mater Gati Matsarvasha Padambo Jaradana Madana Mohanam Seeman Rasaram Vivam Sivana Karsan Venation Herbago Gopinata Sri Siddham Divyad Vrindaranya Kapadrumada Srimad Ratnagara Shima Sanishto Sri Radha Shida Govindado Prasada Vihe Sevamanoshmarami Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmanya Taya Chajikari Taya Krishnaya Govindaya Namo Namaha Mangalam Bhagavan Vishnu Mangalam Guru Raja Jam Mangalam Panari Kaksho Mangalayatano Hari Om Narayanaya Vidmahi Vasudevaya Dhimahi Tano Vishnu Prachodhyate Om Mahadevi Vidmahi Vishnu Panitidimi Tano Lakshmi Prachodhyate Mahalakshmi Namastubhyam Suresari Hari Pare Namastubhyam Dhyanate Tapti Kanchana Gorangi Radha Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sude Devi Pranamani Hari Pare Narayanam Namaskritam Naram Chevanarottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tato Jayodhiriyat Nashna Prayashu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevya Bhagavati Uttamashoki Bhakti Bhavati Naishtaki Nigama Kapurgaritam Param Shukam Akaramitat Sabitam Pibata Bhagatam Rashama Mahor Horisikabu Vibakahum Krishna Sadam Vagade Dharmagani Karo Nashta Dishamisha Paranako Dino Didam Nama Om Vishnu Panaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutare Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Dhanamani Stay Sarasati Devi Gauravani Pacharini Vishes Sunyari Praskita Desati See Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. Well, I'm glad to be back with you after the unexpected cap yesterday morning. The good news is I spent all of Monday afternoon and all of Tuesday doing posters for the Diwali festival coming up November 11th in Salt Lake City. We usually get a good crowd. This year I have made a special effort to see if we can draw in an extra big crowd, let's say over 1,000 people, including a nice fraction of Westerners as well. So we'll see what the fruits of my work were. However, sorry to not had the internet connectivity in order to reach you yesterday, but we're back today. I also want to mention too, I saw that the details for the Christmas weekend retreat in South Texas are now available online. I have a URL for you if you're interested. But the property is in the Rio Grande Valley. It's 7,500 acres. It's called New Navadweep. If you search New Navadweep, you should come up with it. And over Christmas weekend, which I believe would be the 22nd to the 26th, they're inviting devotees to come for swimming, for a tour of the property, Harinam in San Padre Island, which is a great destination for college students from all of the universities of Texas, wonderful prasadam, kirtan, and there are 4 main speakers whose pictures are there. One is Radhika Raman, who incidentally will be speaking next Saturday night in the Salt Lake City Temple. Radhika Raman, in my opinion, one of the, if not the top speaker and top realized devotees in all of ISKCON. He'll be in Salt Lake City this Saturday. Don't miss it. He's one of the speakers. The other speaker is Prahlad, coming all the way from Australia. I know Prahlad is a kirtan singer. He's one of the best in the world. Even as a child in Australia, he was producing albums, popular selling albums of kirtan featured. Now he's an adult, he's a householder. He was here for the Sadhu Sangh in 2022. one of the main kirtan leaders. And I learned that he's a great speaker also. So he'll be on hand. Guru Prasad Swami as the third, and the fourth one is yours truly. We'll all be in South Texas at New Navadvip, I believe from the 22nd to the 25th. That's pretty much coincides with the time that Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita to his friend and disciple Arjuna. And so over the Christmas weekend, Christmas means month in Sanskrit. The word Christ comes from Krishna. So the month of Krishna, and it is called such. December is the month of Krishna, named that way because it was in December that Krishna spoke the immortal words of the Bhagavad Gita. And so quite fittingly, there will be a retreat based on the eternal teachings of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita at New Navadvip in South Texas. Now, what will be required to attend? You pay your transportation, and you indicate your room, and they get you a room in really nice hotels there. There are pictures of it at a discounted rate. So you don't actually pay for the retreat. You pay to get there, and you pay a discounted rate for your hotel. So I presume all the activities and all the prasadam are offered free of charge. I'll provide a URL and more information, but right now I found everything pertaining to that weekend just by Googling New Navadvip, Navadvip, in Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. Something out there on the horizon, which sounds very, very exciting to me. Where we left off last week, we discussed attachment. That one should be practice detachment. And it doesn't matter because there are single people who live in the jungle, sage and ascetics, who can't control their senses. They simply think of sense gratification. They have not succeeded in overcoming the urges of the senses, even while performing penances and austerities in a lonely place. The mind gets the best of them. While on the other hand, there are examples of many householders with children and responsibilities who have controlled the mind, not by repression, but by engaging the mind in the service of the Lord. The main thing to realize is we shouldn't be attached to those things which have no substance. The Bhagavad Gita says that which is real has no cessation, and that which is false has no endurance. So the family, the friends, the country, they have no endurance. And so therefore they have no ultimate reality. It's a reality, but it's an inferior reality to the reality of the soul, which has no cessation. When Akura talks to Dhritarashtra, tries to talk some sense into him, Akura tries to convince Dhritarashtra to give up his unnatural, excessive attachment for his criminally minded son, Duryodhana. Now picture the old blind king pinning all of his hopes for sovereignty on his son, Duryodhana. Duryodhana is not a legitimate heir to the throne. The Pandavas are, but Duryodhana from childhood envied the Pandavas and wanted to usurp their throne. And his father, due to unnatural affection for his son, allowed himself to be manipulated by all the conspiracies that Duryodhana would hatch. Akura is trying to talk some sense into him, and he says, Nea chat yanta shambhisho, kasyid kena chit saha, rajan shena videha, kim nu janmatu bihi. In this world, Akura says, no one has any permanent relationship. And you know, it's interesting because if you read the Srimad Bhagavatam, Dhritarashtra is the recipient of a lot of very high knowledge. There are a lot of people who try to talk sense into Dhritarashtra. And so some of the conversations, most of the conversations that include Dhritarashtra is in the receiving end. People are trying to advise him in the right way. It's the highest philosophy. We've got Bhisma trying to convince Dhritarashtra to give up his attachment for his son and turn to spirituality. We've got his brother Vidura, who is none other than Yamaraj, trying to convince him. We've got, in the present case, we've got Akura trying to convince him. We've got Krishna speaking to him. We've got his wife, Gandharvi, So Dhritarashtra is your classic hard case. Everybody tries to convince him. And the interesting thing is Dhritarashtra pretty much accepts all of this really transcendental advice that his well-wishers have given him. He pretty much, that's why many of these conversations go on, and they get deeper and deeper and deeper, because Dhritarashtra says, I agree, you're absolutely right, we should do this. Yeah, no question about it. But in the end, what trips him up, what prevents him from finishing the race, crossing the finish line, is he just can't give up his attachment for his son. That doesn't mean people aren't trying to wean him of that. So Caru says, Rajan Senapi Dehina Kinyo Janmanavihi. Caru says to the blind king, no one, from an objective point of view, from a rational point of view, no one has any permanent relationship with anyone. The example is given in the 7th canto, Prahlad. Bhutanam yashambasha prapar devi nekanam unyatanam shakarmabi. Jai Krishna and I, many years ago, went to Tirupati in South India. There are 4,500 steps that you climb to reach the temple on the Tirumala hill there. And on the steps there, it's a grueling climb. It took us about 2 3/4 hours, and we were both in good shape. I was running marathons in those days. It took most people a lot longer. And of course, people who are disabled, they take the bus, they take the road. But there are rest stops there. There are little places with some awning where you can get a Fanta or something to drink and rest your feet before you go on. And sometimes there are strangers who sit, there's a big table with 10 chairs. And so people go up and say, do you mind if I sit here? So you talk and you get to know each other for a few minutes, or a half an hour, or maybe even an hour, or one of these wayside tables. But then one group's had their rest and they get up and they continue on. Or maybe one group's coming down and then they resume their descent, and another group is going up. And so they get up and one goes one way and the other goes the other way. There's all this intermingling and temporary mixing. So Prahlad Maharaj says our family circle is like that. We have our karma from the previous life, and we take our birth in the womb of certain parents, similar disposition, and we appear with a surname and a middle name and all these labels and designations and all these expectations based on our body, based on our family, based on our citizenry. And we come together in this family circle, but then at the time of death, because each and every one of us has created different karma, made different decisions, and we have different backgrounds, essentially, prior to this life, we are then again dispersed. Some go up, some go down. Some stay longer in that family. They loiter longer at the table, and some are obliged to get up and leave earlier. This is compared to premature death. Not everybody lives a ripe old age. Some people leave, and there are different ages. There are different ages at which people are obliged to depart their life. We went to 2 funerals last week. One was Kumar Shah and the other was Anjali Das Gupta. Kumar Shah was a very fit guy. He worked out for 2 hours in the gym, even at the age of 80. Very thin, not an ounce of fat on him. Mentally extremely positive, extremely bright, extremely sharp, right? And he was sitting at dinner and he just slumped. He was no health problems, nothing. Apparently in optimal health, sitting at dinner, and he just slumped down. I don't know whether his head hit his food or not, but that was it. He was just gone. But what's the point? You can't even keep onto your own body, what to speak of the family. It's not permanent. It's just like travelers who meet and intermingle at an inn. They come from different directions. They come from different backgrounds. They come having created different karma, and their destiny brings them together for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. They intermingle as cousins, aunts, uncles, grandchildren, grandparents, father, mother, husband, wife. Then one by one, they peel off and they go in their different directions. And then there comes that time when death taps us on our shoulder, and we also have to be on our way, on our journey. Caru tells Dhritarashtra, we can't even hang on to our own bodies. We can't hang on to our own bodies. What to speak of our wife, our children, and the distant relatives. We talk about my body. My body, we like to think that we are the possessors of this body, that we have legal ownership, that we look at our birth certificate, and this proves that I own this body, that this body is mine. Well, if that's the case, when death comes to snatch away this body, to steal the body, that should be a universally illegal, illicit, prohibited act. If you have divine ownership to that body, nobody should be able to snatch it away. And if someone tries to snatch away your property, you have every right to defend it to the best of your ability, to retrieve it, to invoke the authorities, to invoke the full weight of the government in the form of the police to punish that thief and return your goods to you. And yet, how many people, when the body's being dragged away, or when they're being dragged away from the body or separated from the body, which they have claimed is theirs, how many of them are able to shout, thief, 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 please go get my property and bring it back? None, because the body was not your property in the first place. Maya dakshana prakriti suyate hetananane jagadvi paripardite. The body is a byproduct of material nature. When we say nature, we mean somebody's nature. Nature doesn't exist autonomously and independently. We talk about his nature, her nature, their nature. And so nature, we have to ask the question, whose nature? The body is part of Mother Nature, but Mother cannot produce life independently. If a woman walks through the door, actually our own Jai Radhe, she got married last month and she's pregnant already, going to have their first child in 9 months. But she did not conceive apart from her husband. She was duly and legally married. They spent a few days together and boom, there's a child incubating already. There was a process and it involved the male. So we say Mother Nature, but we have to ask the question, whose nature? And if nature is the female, who's the male? Who's the seed-giving father? That's Krishna. Ambija Pradapita. I'm the seed. Bijamam Sarvabhutanam Bidisa. Know, O Arjuna, that I am the seed-giving father for all living beings. The bottom line is that this body is not ours. We can't even hold on to this body at the time of death. What to speak of the extensions of the body? And yet the attachment that comes from sex life, unregulated, uncontrolled, attachment that comes from a non-God-centered life is so great that we see materialistic people deeply illusioned by the body and the extension of the body. Janasha maham aham eti. Janasha aham maham eti. The two most often spoken words in the English language are I and my. I, this body, my friends, my children, my wife, my association, my land. This is called illusion. It is called illusion. As I said, we went to Kumar Shah's funeral on, I think it was, Anjali's was Monday. Kumar Shah's must have been Friday, I believe. different. Kumar, very healthy. He won very quickly. Anjali was in a wheelchair for over 2 years. Anjali was almost 90, and Kumar Shah was at the age of 80. Both well-to-do. Anjali Bengali, Kumar Shah Gujarati. Kumar Shah was an electrical engineer. His wife was a gynecologist. I did the housewarming ceremony for their home. They bought a wonderful, beautiful home about 10, 12, 15 years ago. I did the Griya Pravesha for that. This verse comes to mind from the 10th canto, how temporal everything is. Oh, another quote from the 3rd canto. This is Kapil Dev talking about the temporality of this body and the extension of this body. He says, Tasya Tasya Janonam Nayam Neoguna Kalyamanapina Vayar Vavani Vavaram. Vayar is the air. So due to the air, Tasya Tasya Janonam, the air brings clouds together. Right? Due to the unseen force of the air, clouds come together. Little clouds merge with and become bigger clouds. Bigger clouds get dissipated and become littler clouds. This is going on. You can't see the air, but we know the air is there. We know the air is working because the clouds are always in a stage of mutation. The air is compared to time due to the time factor and our own past decisions. We are brought together like little wisps of cloud are pulled together from different parts of the sky, and they combine into a big cumulus. However, due to the same action of the air, that cumulus then breaks up into little parts, little wisps of cloud again, and dissolves. So everything, all of our coming together and then being dispersed is driven by the unseen time factor and the dynamic of karma. This is what Muchukunda says. Muchukunda was a great king in his previous life. Although he was mortal, although he was denizens of earth, his power and prowess were so formidable that the demigods asked Muchukunda to assist them in helping to fight against the demons, which he did. And the fight was so long and so fierce and demanded so much of him that when the demigods, with his help, eventually prevailed over the demons, the demigods were extremely grateful. So they asked Muchukunda for a boon. And the only thing he could think to ask for was to sleep. He said, could I sleep for 1,000 years? And they said, yes, you can sleep. And he said, oh, yeah. He said, if anybody should wake me up, let me burn him into ashes with my glance. So anyway, that's another story how Krishna kicked him and he burned up the demon Kalyavana. But after Krishna used okay, I'll tell the story. Kalyavana had a huge army and he was attacking the city of Mathura. And so Krishna, and then Jarasandha was on the way also with his 17th army. Krishna wanted to take some of the heat off the city of Mathura. So he appeared to run from the battlefield like a coward. In his feature, running from the battlefield, apparently is a coward. Krishna is known as Ranchor. It means one who runs away from the battlefield. Krishna adopted the role in play of a coward in order to lure Kalyavana away from Dwarka fort. Kalyavana fell for it, and he started chasing, and he left his army. He got himself isolated, and Krishna led him many miles into a cave. When Kalyavana entered the cave, it was somewhat dark. He couldn't see very well, but he saw a form lying on the ground. He thought it was Krishna when he gave him a big kick. So that was not Krishna. That was Muchukunda, who had been sleeping for a long time. And Muchukunda, according to the boon that he was given by the demigods, he woke up, he angrily looked at Kalyavana, and Kalyavana was burned to ashes, thus removing the threat from Dwarka city very deftly, very cleverly. And some commentators say that the reason Krishna didn't fight with Kalyavana himself was because he was a very unclean, low-class person. And Krishna wanted to use some other stratagem to get rid of Kalyavana. Anyway, after that was achieved, the demon was destroyed. Then Krishna and Muchukunda had a very nice conversation there in the cave. Mushikunda offered prayers, he bowed down. And Muchukunda gave a nice insight, a further insight into the temporality of fame, glory, opulence, influence. He says, Purarata hema parishkata chara. He says, even though Purarata, rata means a chariot with emerald, gold plated, a very, very expensive $1 million chariot, even though one rides on a chariot, mata gajir, or alternatively, maybe he rides on a chariot Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, and Tuesdays and Thursdays he rides on a big war elephant, a big tusker with beautiful gold-plated armor and so on and so forth. So people think of a man, a king, who rides on a golden chariot studded with jewels, or who rides on the biggest mountain-like war elephant, as almost like a god among men, not a deva samyatam. Common man will look up to this man on his chariot as he rides by, or on his elephant. They say he's a god among men. He's divine. They'll speak of him in whispered tones with great awe and reverence. However, there is one who is more powerful than the king, and that is time. Just like we said, time is more powerful than the clouds. One cloud may appear to be big and strong, and may appear like a mountain or a whole country in and of itself, with corridors and hallways and arches and columns. I remember when I was a younger person, I spent a month in Bali on Kuta Beach. And while I was there, I would just sit every evening and watch the sunset. Some seller would come by, offer you for a penny or two a coconut with a straw in it. You'd sip your coconut water, and for an hour you'd watch the play of the light and the clouds and the ocean. Just spectacular, like aerial mansions and landscapes and mountains, and it's just unbelievable. And I believe, of course, to this day, there must be a supernatural over and above sunsets in Bali. But just like the unseen air brought all the wisps, all the elements of the cloud together to create a great phantasmagoria, that same air will disperse. And so similarly, due to one's past good karma and due to the force of time, in one lifetime, a man is elevated to a golden chariot or to the top of a war elephant, but more powerful than him, though he may have conquered others and pushed others down, there is one who pushes everybody down. It is said, time conquers all. Time is the only sovereign in this material world. And so therefore it says, Saeva Kali Jarachiram, that in spite of all that influence, I heard a story that Stalin actually believed that when death came for him, he would call the military, he would call forth the Air Force, he would call forth the tanks, he would call forth the infantry. Russia had a vast military, millions of men in the services, and Stalin actually confided in somebody that he felt that he could invoke the military might of the USSR so that he would not be dragged away by the cruel hand of death. Well, we all know how that story ended. We all know how that story ended. Saeva Kalim Dratira. Time is that much more powerful than any king. Kaleva Bashir, that king who was called generally, who was known generally, whose reputation generally was one of a very special, a very gifted, a very powerful sovereign. Ultimately, due to the superior power of time, that Naradev, that one who was called a king among men, comes to the point where he's called stool, ashes, or dirt. Stool, ashes, or dirt. So before we put all our hopes on this body, the sense of this body, we should take a moment to consider the destination or the fate of this body. If you're a Christian in a developed country, your body will be cosmetically disposed of. Both Kumar and Kumar apparently was cremated, but first he was in a coffin. We did the viewing and then put some Ganges water and some tulsi and some flowers from offering, and then the coffin was closed, and we had the funeral over the closed coffin, and then I think 2 days later the coffin was going to be cremated. So if you're a Christian and you were not to be cremated, and you will be quote unquote lucky enough to be disposed of in a tidy ceremonial way, if one is blessed enough to be buried in a coffin, eventually, it may take longer, but eventually one's body will be consumed by worms and other minuscule creatures. If you're from the Hindu persuasion, aside from the fact that Indians have been cremating their bodies for thousands of years, it's a very ecologically sound principle, because after all, how much land can you really afford to set aside for graveyards for interring coffins? Many other people, to save land and out of a sense of ecological responsibility, are using cremation as well. So, but if you're a Christian, your body, it becomes earth to be consumed by worms and other minuscule creatures. If you're a Hindu, your body becomes ashes. And certain cultures believe that the body should serve its own purpose in the chain, in the food chain. And so they don't burn it, nor do they bury it, but they just leave it out. They'll leave it on a raised bier so the vultures and the crows, the carrion eaters, can sustain themselves, in which case the body becomes evacuated as stool. So this body of which we're very proud, and this body about which other people say he's a king, he's a sovereign, he's fortunate, he's like a god, that same body eventually is called ashes, stool, or worms. Prabhupada quotes Sridhar Swami in one of his purports. Sridhar Swami says, after passing through thousands of species and undergoing great struggle, says, finally, the conditioned soul is able to attain this human body. Prahlad Maharaj says, Komara Machara Pragna Dharma Bhava Jodabhamana Shitara Piyadra Marshana. Prahlad Maharaj says, although this human body is made from the same perishable elements, same mucus, bile, phlegm, the same earth, ashes, potential elements, same chemical composition as that of the animals, nevertheless, this human body offers a great opportunity. It offers the opportunity to become immortal. As it says in our song, Consider the Soul, the human form is a unique opportunity to overcome the cycle of rebirth which no one survives. Time to realize your eternal state and attain the spiritual world one day. This is the meaning of human sense. If I'm eternal, why all the external posturing or pretense? My time would be better spent overcoming rebirth and rising high into the spiritual sky. Having achieved a human form of life, those human beings who divert themselves, who distract themselves, who derail themselves by becoming overly attached to this body and the byproducts of this body, miss out on this unique and rare opportunity for eternal happiness, for eternal liberation. This verse, which Sridhar Swami invokes in his commentaries, goes so far as to say that those who do not exercise their right for self-realization in human form become enemies of both themselves and humanity. They become enemies of both themselves and humanity. In our talk last Sunday, we quoted Abraham Maslow, the famous psychologist. He said, first of all, if you don't intend in this human form of life of being everything that God made you to be, stretching your faith, becoming men and women of faith, heroes of faith, if you don't intend on maximizing the potential that God gave you, he says, you will be unhappy all the days of your life. You will be unhappy all the days of your life. We're meant to transform. We come like larvae, like worms, We go into our cocoon, but we're not meant to stay stuck in the cocoon. It may be comfortable, it may be warm, it may be sheltered in the cocoon, but that's not nature's plan. We go through the cocoon. An arm comes out one day, a leg comes out one day, the head comes out one day, and lo and behold, we're meant to undergo that transformation whereby the worm, the larva, becomes nature's most beautiful, graceful creature, the butterfly. So if you do not become a butterfly in the human form of life, you end up being so frustrated, so regretful, so full of anxiety that you become your own worst enemy and you become the enemy of others. You shouldn't marry unless you can deliver your wife from death. You shouldn't have children unless you can deliver your children from death. You shouldn't have dependents as a politician or a leader unless you can deliver the citizens from death. If you can't deliver yourself, you obviously can't deliver others. And so not only are you not a well-wisher, but if you don't discharge the purpose for which this human form of life is to awarded us, you become an enemy, both of yourself and of humanity. Nivrita Tarshira Pagiyamana Babosha Chota Kau Tamashoga Panwan Baraja Tabina Pishada. The question is asked. Krishna is so blissful. Krishna is so beautiful. Krishna is all powerful. Krishna is omniscient. Krishna created us. We're the offspring of Krishna. We're his parts and parcels. He loves us. He wants the best for us. He's seated within our hearts. He never abandoned us, even though we tried our best to abandon him. And even today, he's poised to shed light and love into your life. All you're asked to do is to invite him in by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So it says, who will pass, who will take a pass on all of that? It said, only someone who's an enemy of their own soul, only someone who is too absorbed in killing themselves and killing those close to them. Only such a person can be immune from the attractiveness of Lord Krishna, our supreme well-wisher. So Gajendra appears to be in that category. He appears to have missed it. He's missed a human birth, first of all. And having taken birth amongst the elephants, he appears to have missed this point. He appears not to have caught up the main purpose of life, which is God consciousness. Just the opposite. When he enters the scene, he's fully engaged in protecting his family members, removing obstacles by using his strong mountain-like body to go before his wives and children, remove the thorns, remove the trees and rocks that may be in the way. They come to a cooling body of water. They're overheated, they're thirsty, they're a little dizzy. The children and the wives recognize that to go into the water, there may be enemies within the water. To be a creature of the land, but in the water puts one at a disadvantage. And so they're hungry, they're thirsty, they're dry, they're dehydrated, but they don't want to go in the water. And Gajendra says, I'll do it. Don't worry, I'll do it. And he goes into the water and he takes care of himself, his own needs, and then he sprays his children, so on and so forth. He's literally putting his life on the line for his family members. And it would appear that he is our poster boy for forgetfulness of God. He is our poster boy. And yet we know his background. Yesham tu antigadambam gyanapun tedundana bajanti mamdridabataha. That he has been a devotee in his past life, named Imradumna. He was quite advanced. Through no fault of himself, a sage took something he did or failed to do as an insult, when in fact that was not the intention. And the sage named Augusta cursed him to take his next birth as an animal. Now, that is part of the plan of the Lord. Just like in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna seemed to be attached. He seemed to be in ignorance. He seemed to be paralyzed. He seemed to be depressed. He seemed almost to the point of suicidalness. So, but appearances are not everything. The Lord has he has his plan. He has the lesson through which he is employing the devotee to teach it. So Gajendra appears to be our poster boy for family attachment. He takes his family as all in all. He's got excessive affection for his wife and children. He's not that concerned about the smaller animals that he may be trampling as he walks through the forest. His area of concern, his circle of concern, does not extend to those who are not in his family. He puts his own life at risk in order to make sure that his family is comfortable. And for what? For what does he all apparently do this? For a little bit of sex pleasure. The chains by which we are thrown into this material world and the chains by which we feel ourselves comfortably well situated and loath to get out of material circumstances are the chains of sex life. Material life can be summed up in either gross or subtle sex life. That's what brings us here, and that's what keeps us here. Those are the shackles. Again, Prahlad Maharaj, who tomorrow we'll be quick to mention that Prahlad Maharaj was married. Prahlad Maharaj did have children, and many of the great devotees. In fact, we'll talk tomorrow about how out of the 12 Mahajans, 6 of them were married. So we're not talking against women. We're not talking about the marriage institution, but we're trying to look at everything objectively and put it in perspective. Nowhere in Bhakti Yoga is it said you have to give up sex life, you have to give up marriage, you have to give up children. But you have to recognize what its value is and properly prioritize yourself. So we'll just finish with this thought and we'll pick up on it next Monday. Yan maitunari grimedi sukamichitam kandayavana kareo yavadukatakam tripanti naha kruparam bahuduka bajaha kanduvidar manashim bishaheta. Prahlad Maharaj compares the pleasure of sex life, which basically bounds all living beings and all species of life, to this material world. He calls it kanduyanena. He calls the so-called pleasure of sex life as an itching, Now, in our right minds, in our sober moments, no one would think that an itch is pleasurable. There's nothing more frustrating than an itch, a mosquito bite. It's just you know, if you scratch it, it gives you a really, it's maddening. You know, you can't not scratch it. But then when you scratch it, it gives you a few minutes of relief, and then it comes back twice as bothersome, twice as irritating. The only so-called pleasure that you derive from an itch is the momentary cessation of the itch after you've scratched it. But in quick order, the sensation of itching comes back twice as strong. So then you're immediately faced with a decision, well, shall I scratch it again a second time? Because if I know I'll get temporary relief, but then the itching will be even more. It's like a tyranny. It's like, how can this pass as pleasure when, again, that which is true has no cessation. If it is to be real pleasure, it should be unlimited. It should not just be pure, weak relief from suffering. It should be oceanic. Real pleasure is ever increasing. It never diminishes. It doesn't have a beginning, a middle, and end. It's like a tidal wave that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. On the other hand, this so-called pleasure of sex is called tucham, tuch. Even the word itself gives you a sense of insignificance. Tuch. It's like, if you want someone to be quiet, someone says, do say, tuch, be quiet. We don't, we're talking about more important things here. We don't want to hear what you have to say right now. So you say touch, touch. Touch is something very, very insignificant. Yan maitu nari grimedi sukamhi tucham. The so-called pleasure of sex life is compared to the rubbing of two hands or the rubbing of your skin or the scratching to relieve an itch. And this is what those who are not God-centered, this is what those who are overly attached to kith and kin, to the exclusion of their own inner spiritual selves, they think this tucham, this insignificant pleasure, compared to the itching of two hands, is the greatest platform of happiness, when in fact, it is the greatest source of distress. The vast majority of crimes have their basis in sex life, isn't it? Especially murder. Especially murder. Prahlad Maharaj, Sukha Dukkha Moksha Sankalpa Sarvnodhyaya Anihaya Samrakuna. There's a sweet, there's a type of a burfi. It is said that if you haven't eaten it, all you hear about, all people talk about, if they've eaten it, all they talk about is, you have to eat this burfi. You haven't lived until you've eaten this burfi. So everywhere he's bothered by the fact that he hasn't eaten the burfi. This is a celibate youngster. Say, oh, you know, everybody's talking about this burfi. It's burfi. So naturally you become curious, you become attached, and you want to eat the burfi. But the problem is that when you eat the burfi, it's not satisfying. You have to eat another burfi, another burfi, and eventually you wish you hadn't eaten the first burfi. You wish you hadn't eaten the first burfi because it's so addicting. And you realize that the first burfi was the one that you enjoyed the most. The second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, you don't enjoy it anymore. It's just become an addictive habit. So you know, when we're single and we're celibate, you know, all our friends and all the relatives and materialists, everybody's talking, all the billboards, there's pornography on your phone everywhere you go. Everybody talks about sex. So how could you not be curious? Well, I want to get in on that too. It seems to be such a big deal. Everyone's talking about it. But the reason everyone's talking about it is because they're caught. They're helpless. See, they're trying over and over and over and over and over again to satisfy the sex urge, and yet it becomes more dominant. It dominates them more chemically, mentally, physiologically, and it gives them less pleasure. So they become more addicted and they get less pleasure. No wonder the great devotee, I think it was Yadavacharya, he says, Yadavari mama cheta Krishna paradavinda nava navarasha dumani and Tadavari bata nanga shangamesh maramane bhavati mukha phuk bikara shustanisivanamcha. We'll finish with this quote. It's 20 past 8. But Yadavacharya, he was a great king. In those days, kings could have multiple wives. They could also have courtesans. There were courtesans in the court to whom the kings weren't married, but they were welcome to enjoy them as well. Practically speaking, the sex life of a king was beyond our wildest imagination. And yet Yadavacharya attests to the fact that he got so much more, not ever decreasing, but ever increasing pleasure from serving the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Without any limits, because it's spiritual. Material has limits. Material follows the law of diminishing returns. The more you put into it, the less you get out of it. The greatest, the time that one enjoyed the drink or the heroin hit or the sex, that was the time when one enjoyed it the most, and every time after that was simply downhill. But when you start chanting Hare Krishna, you may not enjoy it to the level of its potentiality, because our tastes, our habits are down there with the animals. But what happens is, the more we practice, the more we chant, the more we cleanse our heart, the more we're restored to our original spiritual healthy consciousness, and then the more we unleash ever increasing, ever expanding pleasure. Prabhupada said that in India, when a man has jaundice, he tastes sugar as very bitter. Now, sugar cane is the cure for jaundice, but the ailing person tastes it as very bitter. He'll not voluntarily take it. Oftentimes, 4 strong men will have to hold him down and force the sugar cane in his mouth because he hates the taste of it, being diseased. However, as the body is gradually restored to its normal, healthy condition, he starts to taste the sugar cane for the sweetness it is. Sense gratification may be like nectar at first, but in the end, it's like poison. Leaves us enemies of ourselves, enemies of our family and our friends and the country. Leaves us full of regret, anxiety, and vague feelings of guilt. On the other hand, we may not immediately recognize the nectar of the holy name for what it is, but if we'll follow the advice and the encouragement and the testimonies of the great authorities, some of whom were married and some of whom weren't married, talk more about that next week, but we follow in the footsteps of the great authorities, will come to taste the chanting of the holy names and the devotional service of Krishna for the unlimited, pleasurable dynamic that it actually is. It'll just get greater and greater and greater and greater and greater. And eventually we'll come to the point that Yadavacharya says, whenever I happen to think of my previous life in the company of multiple beautiful women, my lips curl with distaste. Compared to the pleasure of devotional service, the tucham, the insignificant temporary itching of sex life, is not even worth mentioning now. Now that I've come to the real thing, and now that I've got everything in its proper perspective. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. All right, we'll get together again next Monday to hear more of the words of great souls like Kapila Dev, like Akura, like Prahlad Maharaj, like Rishabh Dev. With us here on Facebook, we had Chad, who jumped on right away, quickly followed by Brent Spencer, Govinda Dev. Haribo, Govinda Dev's giving the Bhagavatam class this Saturday. He's opening for Radhika Raman. Tough job. And Radhika Raman's giving the motivational talk around 7 o'clock this coming Saturday. Bhakti Gary, nice lotus flower emoji there. He also offers his respects. And underneath Bhakti Gary is Bear. I hope I'm pronouncing that. Beremontes. Beautiful name. Bear Montes. Hare Krishna, good morning. Touch. Yeah, whenever you get bothered, just go touch. Might help. That's from Sukshma, bit of practical advice. And then, of course, Rob, you have some rhymes for us this morning?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. It's been a busy morning, so I haven't gotten to put much down. But what I was able to get is, let's see. In this life, beings coalesce to bless, to test in Maya's mess. That was all I was able to get today, Prabhuji. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. I know you have things to do. Okay.
There was a lot more there. I just wasn't able to get it down.
That's fine. Anybody else is welcome to get in touch with the Muse if they like and add later on to the Facebook comments or not, as the case may be. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.